has invested over $9.7 billion into national security.
Almighty God, by whom alone kings reign and princes decree justice, and from whom alone cometh all counsel, wisdom, and understanding, we thine unworthy servants here gathered together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, to direct and guide us in all our consultations. And grant that we, having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, partial affections, the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the king, the public weal, peace and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Be seated, please. Good morning, everyone. I call to order the sitting of this Honorable Senate for Friday, June 5th, 2026. And before we get into the agenda for today, I wish to extend a warm welcome to persons seated in the gallery. And we have with us the Johnstone Primary from Lysons in St. Thomas. 5 members, we are those, okay. So that we make the distinction, the Johnstone Primary, can you just stand, please? We have 5 students and there is 1 teacher. And I suspect that is the teacher in the red, right? Yes. Very well, thank you very much. And we also have visiting not only the Parliament today, but Jamaica, from the University of Westminster. 18 students from the University of Westminster, and 3 teachers are with them. Can you just stand for me, please? And to be recognized, wish to extend a welcome to you, as I said, not only to this Parliament, but to the island of Jamaica. And we hope that you enjoy the time that you have here. Thank you very much. And before we go further, I wish to bring to the Senate's attention and for us to recognize the passing of retired Justice Ian Xavier Fort, who was last sitting in the Court of Appeal of Jamaica. But he's someone who has had a long and distinguished career in the legal profession and the judiciary, rising to the position of President of the Jamaica Court of Appeal. And when you take them combined, he would have had over 50 years in the legal profession. From my recollection, he would have tutored at the Norman Manley Law School at a time when I would have attended Norman Manley Law School and would have come under his tutelage, and he has also mentored many young attorneys, many persons in the legal profession. And I would want to say most importantly, and what is also near to us, that he's the husband of the Member of Parliament for St. James, West Central, Mrs. Marlene Malahoo Fort. And from the seat where I sit and from the Jamaica Senate, we wish to extend to Mrs. Marlene Malahoo Fort, as well as to his family and dear friends, our deepest condolences on his passing, and wish for him to have God's light perpetually shine on him. Wish, any words?
Mr. President, thank you very much. I will not be long, as of course, Justice Fort was not a member of this chamber, which is usually the circumstance in which we give more extended tributes. But I would rise to join you in extending sympathies to our former colleague, former Senator Marlene Malahoo Fort, who now sits in that other place on the passing of her dear husband, even as we extend to the wider family and indeed the legal and judicial fraternity our condolences on the passing of a great legal mind. We do ask that or pray rather, that his soul rest in peace and that light perpetual continue to shine, and that indeed those he has left behind are comforted by memories during their time of grief. Thank you.
Senator Scott Motley.
Mr. President, I also want to extend my condolences to the family of the now late Ian Ford. It struck me this morning that our greats are really passing, because just a couple of weeks ago, we were acknowledging the contribution that Hugh Hart had made. One of the things that the legal fraternity has been saying about the passing of former President of the Court of Appeal, Ian Ford, is how much he mentored them, especially when he was at the DPP, giving young people all sorts of opportunities, even to make submissions, prepare submissions for the Privy Council. I know that he had a tremendous impact on the students at the law school, and there were quite a few people who were tutored by him. I want to say in particular to his widow, these words that you have to use so suddenly just really shock you, how sorry I am, because I know that we used to have conversations, since we are both married to older men, and we used to talk a lot about what was happening in our families. So I feel it personally for her, and I extend my condolences, not just on my own behalf, but on behalf of the entire team. May his soul rest in peace.
Thank you very much. All right, statements by ministers. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the Senate are the following: annual report and audited financial statements of the Jamaica Civil Aviation Authority for the financial year 2022-2023. Annual report and audited financial statements of the Spectrum Management Authority for the financial year 2023-2024. Annual report of the University of the West Indies Mona campus for the academic year 2024-2025. Integrity Commission's investigation reports into concerns that the following officers employed to the Clarendon Municipal Corporation failed to file their statutory declaration with the Commission for the year 2023, contrary to law and their indicative rulings. 1, Mr. Rohan Sherwood, a project officer, and 2, Mr. Sheldon Allison, a compliance officer. Integrity Commission's investigation reports into concerns that the following officers formerly employed to the Cannabis Licensing Authority failed to file their statutory declaration with the Commission for the year 2023, contrary to the law and their indicative rulings. 1. Mr. Dwight Bailey, a Director of Human Resource Management and Development, and 2. Mr. Philip Chambers, a Senior Director of Operations. The Integrity Commission's investigation report into concerns that Mr. Ricardo Monroe, a Manager, Public-Private Partnership and Privatization, employed to the Development Bank of Jamaica, failed to file his statutory declaration with the Commission for the year 2023, contrary to law and its indicative ruling. Report of investigation concerning allegations of corruption, impropriety, and irregularities in the grant, variation, and revocation of firearm licenses and storage of firearms and ammunition at the Firearm Licensing Authority. Integrity Commission's investigation reports into concerns that the following officers employed to the Forestry Department failed to file their statutory declaration with the Commission for the year 2023, contrary to law and their indicative rulings. 1. Mr. Jason Gordon, a Director of Forest Resource Assessment. 2. Mr. Jakes Plummer, a Senior Compliance and Enforcement Officer. And 3. Mr. Clovin Daniels, an Inventory and Stores Officer. Integrity Commission's investigation reports into concerns that the following officers failed to file their statutory declaration with the Commission for the year 2023, contrary to law and their indicative rulings. 1. Mr. Michael Hurst, a forklift operator, current porter employed to the Bank of Jamaica. 2. Mrs. Michelle Toyloy Carter, an Executive Director, formerly employed to the Devon House Development Limited. And 3. Ms. Tion Harvey, a temporary audit assistant, formerly employed to the Betting, Gaming and Lotteries Commission. Statement on fiscal performance for the Independent Fiscal Commission for the fiscal year 2025-2026. Bank of Jamaica Monetary Policy Statement for 6 months ended March 2026. Bank of Jamaica Quarterly Monetary Policy Report for the quarters ending February 2026 and May 2026. Auditor General's Department audited financial statements for the Parochial Revenue Fund for the financial year 2023-2024. Auditor General's Department certified appropriation accounts under head 16049 recurrent for the Management Institute for National Development 2024-2025. Annual performance report of the Minister of Local Government and Community Development for the financial year 2025-2026. And finally, the Minister Papers number 31 to 34 of 2026 respectively, titled Cabinet Agenda Issues dated February 2, 2026, February 9, 2026, February 16, 2026, and February 23, 2026. Thank you, Mr. President.
I just want to clarify whether or not the report mentioned has been tabled from the Integrity Commission. It's the same report that we were told the presiding officers would not bow and present to the Parliament. Because the President that was gracious in thanking me for raising the question. And I want to ask his permission to extend to Mark Golding and Michael Hilton the thanks for their correct statement of the law in respect to the issue. Thanks very much. Just want to know if that's the same report for which you would not bow.
All right, bills brought from the Honorable House of Representatives. Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notes of motion, Notes of motions given orally. Questions and answers to questions. Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to sittings of the Senate. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the Senate first obtained. And before I get to public business, although I did not see the notes here, but I do recall from the sitting of the Standing Orders Committee, there was a request from Senator Shireen Golden Campbell for her to appear on by IT, right? So I am asking the permission of the Senate for Senator Golden Campbell to so attend. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. Yeah. Welcome, Senator Golden Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. President.
And my apologies for not doing this earlier.
No problem, Mr. President. Thank you to my colleagues as well.
Thank you. All right, public business.
Mr. President, today it is intended to take the bill shortly entitled the National Housing Trust Amendment Special Provisions Act 2026 through its second reading and its concluding stages. I want to thank Senator Hill for having taken charge of the bill in my absence. And I will take the second leg of this relay as well as the final one. Thank you, Senator Hill. Mr. President, the bill seeks to amend the National Housing Trust Act to allow for the continuation of the annual special distribution from the National Housing Trust to central government over the 5-year fiscal period starting 26-27, our current fiscal year, through to 2030, 2031. Mr. President, as you may be aware, earlier this year, in February, in fact, the government announced its intention to continue with the annual transfers from the National Housing Trust to central government as part of revised revenue measures. As we debate this bill, Mr. President, to ensure the operationalization of this measure, I want to just start by recalling two very important points. The first being that strategic reallocations of financial resources are necessary from time to time by government. In pursuance of crucial national objectives, a strategic reallocation of financial resources is an appropriate step for which there is significant precedence. In fact, Mr. President, interesting historical fact is that the NHT itself was initially capitalized through allocations from the National Insurance Scheme through an amendment to the National Insurance Act of 1976. Mr. President, secondly, the NHT has previously been used strategically for national priorities and fiscal consolidation. Mr. President, the application of the NHT resources for other national priorities within the context of broader macroeconomic management also has precedent. In the 1990s, under former Prime Minister Patterson, the NHT provided support for an education reform initiative. And in 2013, under former Prime Minister Simpson Miller, in order to meet obligations under the extended fund facility with the International Monetary Fund, the then government took for the first time the step which is against us, again, before us today, that is, they directed NHT contributions towards central government for fiscal consolidation in the amount of $11.4 billion. Mr. President, this was effected or facilitated by an amendment to the National Housing Trust Act, the provisions of which then expired in 2017. Mr. President, under the 2016 administration of Prime Minister Holness, given the need for further budgetary support for the government's economic stabilization and reform program, amendments were again made to the NHT Act in August 2017 to facilitate the continuation of annual transfers from the NHT for the fiscal years 2017-18 to 2020-21 and then again, Mr. President, in December 2020 to facilitate annual transfers through to financial year 25-26. Mr. President, in 2020, clearly we would recall the massive economic disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, and that was what required continuation of the mechanism. Mr. President, it is therefore clearly entirely reasonable to have foreseen that the even more significant economic losses and damage caused by Hurricane Melissa in October of last year would require retention of this mechanism. Mr. President, in reaffirming the government's clear and expressed belief that the NHT funds ought to be used for their intended purpose, that is to increase and enhance Jamaica's stock of available housing, we also reaffirm with confidence that the NHT funds are in fact being put to that use to the greatest extent that they have ever been. Mr. President, this is not to say that more is not required and that more is not always needed, but it is indisputable that this administration has issued more mortgages and started and built more houses than the opposition did in their commensurate time at the wicket. The numbers tell the story. Mr. President, furthermore, in financial year 26-27, notwithstanding the continuation of the transfers, the NHT will invest approximately $50 billion in housing solutions, alongside an additional $21 billion in subsidies to support affordability.
More and more money.
The trust currently manages more than 41,000 housing solutions across the country, including 10,700 under construction, nearly 6,000 at the contract stage, more than 11,500 in procurement, and 11,600 in current planning and design. I'm sure that colleagues on this side will be happy to share some more about what is being done in the housing sector, as well as some of the more impactful interventions that the NHT has already made to support its mortgage holders who were affected by Hurricane Melissa, and they are significant. Mr. President, in addition, this government has reduced NHT interest rates to the lowest ever. It has transformed and expanded access by contributors, including teachers, nurses, firefighters, and members of our security forces who already benefit from reduced mortgage rates. Very soon, Mr. President, there will be further announcements to be made. Mr. President, our young people, Mr. President, are also seeing increased opportunities. And as of July 1st this year, they will see more, as 20% of the NHT housing solutions will be reserved for persons under 35. Mr. President, contributors in the lowest income earning brackets can pay as low as 0%, Mr. President, under this administration. And for existing homeowners that don't fit into any of these categories, Mr. President, access to financing has also been accelerated through expanded pathways, including expansion of maintenance grants and loans, upgrades, including use of solar systems, Mr. President. And all of this has happened under the administration while undertaking the same transfers. Mr. President, proper leadership, strategic management, and effective planning and operations with the Jamaican people's interests always at the forefront of our minds and always at the heart of our policies have made all the difference. Mr. President, we are doing all that can be done for contributors while maintaining the health of the institution. Arguments that we are watering down the purpose or the mission of the NHT are, in fact, sorely misinformed. Mr. President, I want to also summarily say up front, although I know that some colleagues on my side will also expand on this issue, that the argument which has been raised elsewhere, that discontinuing these distributions would now allow the government to use the NHT to convert those funds to meet the housing demand, that is to close the housing gap. And this argument is also not grounded in Jamaica's realities, Mr. President. Our housing shortages are not solvable purely by access to financing. They are driven by multiple bottlenecks, including, as I said in very brief summary, and I count on my colleagues to expand on these matters, availability of service land, infrastructure constraints, road, water, electricity in the appropriate areas, cost of construction, labor shortages in the construction sector, lengthy planning and approval processes, titling and administration issues. We're tackling these, Mr. President, but these matters are systemic and take time. The reality is that if we did not proceed with the transfers being debated today, those constraints would still subsist even as we seek to solve them, such that the NHT could not instantly convert those funds into housing, while the discontinuation on the other side, Mr. President, would absolutely incontrovertibly have wider immediate negative effect on the population. Mr. President, in response to persons who may ask about the NHT's ability to afford the distributions, I want to assure them, whether they are members of this chamber or not, that the NHT is more than able to sustain the annual $11.4 billion transfers to the government over the medium term, while maintaining adequate cash surpluses. The NHT continues to maintain a strong asset position. In fact, assets exceed liabilities by approximately 1.8 times and will continue to do so over the medium term. Therefore, based on the expected expenditure plans, a strong revenue base and robust asset position, and again, I hope to hear more about this during the debate in more detail, notwithstanding the transfers, Mr. President, it will be able to continue to operate profitably while expanding access to housing. Mr. President, given that Jamaica's fiscal environment has been significantly altered by the passage of Hurricane Melissa, the government reluctantly opted to continue this particular revenue measure. The clear reality, as alluded to earlier, is that beyond the personal experiences of dislocation, loss, and disruption caused by Hurricane Melissa, extensive destruction to critical infrastructure, productive sectors, and public assets have placed severe pressure on the public finances and increased the need for continued recovery spending. Discontinuation of this measure at this time would result in a significant fall off in government revenues at a time when these funds are needed even more. The alternative would be to cut programs delivering wider benefits or to levy new taxes on the backs of the Jamaican people. Our ability to deliver on the government's economic program in the best and widest interests of all Jamaicans, therefore, continues to rely on these transfers from the NHT to fund expenditures already outlined in the national budget. And I look forward to presentations by colleagues which may expand on details around these realities. Mr. President, allow me to say, by way of context, that I am proud that as a member of this government led by Dr. the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, special shout out to Senator Brown, our hallmarks have been integrity, prudence, fiscal responsibility, and care and support for the most vulnerable. It gives me special pleasure, it really does. This government has made strategic investments across all sectors that have demonstrated how good management benefits every single Jamaican. Mr. President, the results are clear. Jamaica is the safest it has been in decades. Our country has achieved the highest agricultural outputs ever. Employment has reached record highs. More hospitals and health centers have been and are being built and renovated, with more doctors and nurses serving our people. More access to potable water and more irrigation of arable land to our farmers have been and are being provided. Mr. President, more access to education and skills training in emerging areas, and transportation, safe transportation, being provided for our students. Mr. President, perhaps even more recently, we have cushioned the population from the worst effects of global shocks, including absorption of increases in oil prices through Petrojam subsidies. Mr. President, we do not claim perfection, but it is important that we acknowledge progress made across sectors, even as we continue to be committed to doing more to improve the lives of all Jamaicans, ensuring that we make the best and most widely impactful use of the public purse through strong and purposeful management. This demonstrates through results, Mr. President, through outcomes, that this administration understands how to manage through difficult times. Mr. President, I want to briefly remind members of the wider context of the bill, because despite all that we have achieved, 5 steps forward, Melissa has taken 10 steps back, particularly in the western side of the island. We do need to protect our achievements and gains while having to navigate recovery and rebuilding in the aftermath of a direct hit from one of the strongest storms on records. The task ahead, Mr. President, notwithstanding all that has been done, remains tremendous. It will involve the coordination, careful management, and execution of several very large projects across the length and breadth of the country. These will be delivered through the NARA, the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority, through existing institutions, as well as through public-private partnerships operating alongside and in concert with the NARA. Financing will be largely reliant on additional sources beyond the usual sources available, including the historic package being obtained from the international financial institutions, as has been announced. Mr. President, budgeting absolutely cannot be business as usual, and all revenue sources available to the government must be on the table, given the criticality of this time. Mr. President, generally speaking, fiscal realities require prudent and sometimes difficult choices. In circumstances where deficits must be financed, governments are left with limited options: cutting essential services, raising taxes, or responsibly reallocating available resources. In Jamaica's case, it is obvious that large-scale public investment is necessary to provide current circumstances presented by Hurricane Melissa, including the deficits which will occur in ensuing years. Given the significant fiscal pressures in these unprecedented times, the government has therefore decided to extend the NHT drawdown for the next 5 fiscal years. If you will permit me, Mr. President, I'll do a brief clause-by-clause presentation. Mr. President, the bill comprises 3 clauses which make provisions as follows. Clause 1 sets out the short title and construction of the bill, which is cited as the National Housing Trust Amendment Special Provisions Act 2026, and that it must be read and construed as one with the National Housing Trust Act and all amendments thereto. Clause 2 seeks to amend Section 4 of the National Housing Trust Act to allow the NHT to provide financing of up to a maximum annual amount of $11.4 billion for fiscal consolidation in respect of each of the financial years ending respectively on the 31st of March 2027, the 31st of March 2028, 31st of March 2029, 31st of March 2030, and the 31st of March 2031. This clause, Mr. President, also provides that financing in respect of the above may be by way of distribution, grant, or otherwise, as the minister responsible for finance may determine. Clause 3, Mr. President, outlines the duration of the act, providing that it will continue into force until March 31, 2031, and will then expire. Mr. President, in the circumstances which I have explained to this House, I very much look forward to the due consideration and support of this very important bill by both sides. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Minister Johnson-Smith. And I recognize Senator Professor Floyd Morris.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I rise to make my contribution to this debate. And in rising, Mr. President, I have been forced to look at the memorandum of objects and reasons for the bill to get an indication as to why we are debating and considering this bill. And it is instructive to note, as the minister outlined, that the reason is to provide a pool of funds for the government to finance expenditure without, according to the memorandum of objects and reason, without raising taxes. Mr. President, I want to indicate up front that based on the current construct of the bill, that it does not enjoy my personal confidence and it does not enjoy the support of the team of which I am a part on this side. And I will be proposing some amendments to the bill, and we will see where it takes us from there. But, Mr. President, in making my contribution to this debate, I want to indicate that this is a continuous plundering of the resources of the NHT. Because from 2016 to now, 10 years that the government has been in power. And the government has taken out $114 billion from the NHT. 114 billion. And plans to take another $57 billion over the next 5 years. That is a cumulative $171 billion that they would have taken out of the NHT. Now, I want to point and make it clear that the NHT, when it was established, the NHT is a fund that have been designed for contributors to assist in building affordable houses. That's the purpose of the NHT. It's a contribution scheme. And every 8 years, individuals get a refund of their contribution. It is not a fund that government, it is not a fund that should be consistently used to finance the budget. Because what has happened now, and I hear the government boasted last year, no new taxes. Senator, last year. Yes, not this year. They boasted no new taxes. But taking out money from the NHT for 10 consecutive years to fund the budget is a form of indirect taxation. So no matter how much you want to take to spin it, it is a form of indirect taxation because those funds belong to the people, the workers who contribute to the fund. So, Mr. President, 171 billion and another 114 and another 57, taking us to $171 billion. Mr. President, as I reflected on the amount of money that have been taken out of the NHT. I keep on hearing a statement that our Prime Minister, because he's the Prime Minister of Jamaica, our Prime Minister, then opposition leader, made in 2013, I think it was Cleveland. I think it was 2013. And the statement keep on resonating in my head, and I want to play it for this Honorable Senate. I want to play it for the Honorable Senate because there is a tendency in this chamber that when the Prime Minister's name is mentioned, there are some howlers who make and move to attack and try to ridicule individuals for calling the Prime Minister's name. And I say I have to carry the statement because I don't want nobody to say me I make up nothing on the Prime Minister. Not making up anything. I want Senator Cleveland. I'm trying to get the statement. I'm trying to get the statement. So, but the point, Mr. President, is that when the then government initiated the measure to take funds from the NHT, $11.4 billion, correct as the minister said, it was stridently opposed by the Prime Minister now. Stridently. And he said that he was going to ring fence the funds of the NHT to protect the workers' money. I don't see, Senator Scott Motley, anything in these measures in this bill that resembles ring fencing. Nothing to me that look like ring fencing, because ring fencing has to do with protection, encircling. But what we see here is a broad raiding of the NHT barn by the government. A broad raiding of the NHT barn by the government. And Mr. President, it is of tremendous concern to me because the NHT is one of the institutions that have been established in law for a specific purpose. And we see that there is a major challenge of housing in the Jamaican society, and in particular, affordable housing, because that is the mandate of the NHT. And what we have seen since 2016 is a continued increase in the price of housing on the market. In 2016, when we left a one-bedroom house, you could get a one-bedroom house for between $7 and $8 million. Now, it's between $13 and $14 million. You could get a two-bedroom house for about $13 or $14 million. Now, if you don't have 30 and 40 million dollars, you cannot get a 2-bedroom house. And to make it worse, and this is the fundamental point, because the government's actions are contributing to the escalation of the price of houses. Open your ears now, brethren. The continued escalation in the price of houses. You know, Mr. President, I've pointed out in this chamber already that I live in Pines of Karachi, and right above Pines of Karachi, a development is taking place that is facilitated by the Housing Agency of Jamaica. And the price of those, the lots, hear me now, the price of the lots, the HAJ lots, $25 million, the lot alone. If you don't have $25 million, you can't get one of the lots up there. That in of itself is contributing to the upward pressure on the price of houses. And that is why workers who have been contributing to the NHT cannot find affordable houses on the market. Cannot find affordable houses on the market. And this has to be corrected. Mr. President, you know, I heard the minister saying in her opening remarks that the NHT was funded by, in its early days, funded by NIS. And that statement, Minister, is not accurate. Because when NHT was brought into effect in 1976 by the Michael Manley administration, the decision was taken that because we never had specific legislation at the time to use the NIS Act to collect the funds, and those funds would be repatriated to the NHT for the intended purpose. We did a similar thing. We did a similar thing in 2003 with the NHF. And I know a lot about this because I was a part of the ministerial team at the time that was charged to plot the pathway for the newly constructed NHF, another one of the institutions created by the People's National Party administration to bolster resilience in our country. And I tell you, Mr. President, you know, the NHF, we decided that NIS would have collected the funds and a percentage, I think it was 0.5%, would go towards the establishment of the NHF. Okay, so I understand that the tape is, yes, so right. Let me.
Sorry, Mr. Senator Floyd Morris. We have a standing orders that you're going to follow, right? There is a standing order that you will have to follow.
Yes.
All right? So be guided.
And I am so guided, Mr. President. I'm so guided, Mr. President, if you could oblige by activating that standing order so that I could get that tape played. But it's not the first time, Mr. President, that such a tape would be played, because I have seen in the Senate, specifically Senator Longmore, some time ago, showing a picture or a video. So, you know, I can't understand why, yes, you know, so I can't understand why this approach now, you know.
Sorry. Look here. I can't recall the Senator Longmore issue. I may not have been sitting here. I am applying the standing orders, and that is it. It's as simple as that.
Yes, and I'm asking you the specific standing orders that you have brought to my attention, Mr. President.
All right. You know, there have been some comments that have been made elsewhere. And for a member of the Senate to be sitting outside of the chamber and shouting down to the presiding officer to say, which standing order, which standing order. Every senator should make themselves okay with the standing order. And I am saying that you must comply with the standing order 82A6.
Yes. So I am asking the chairman permission to play the video or the tape subject to standing order 82.6.
Well, my approval can only be given if it were sought prior to, and so that I could have a hearing of what is going to be played, because I'm not going to, on the fly, permit the playing of any recording that I do not know what is contained in the recording.
Mr. President,
sorry,
Mr. President,
excuse me, please. Excuse me.
Mr.
And
President,
so that we understand what the standing order is.
And Mr. President,
Senator Floyd Morris, I'm speaking at the moment.
I want to move on from the point, Mr. President.
Take it easy.
I want to move on from the point.
Take it easy for me, please. And so that everyone, because sometimes persons who are watching think that we are just making up rules on the fly. And I am wanting to read the appropriate standing order that we have all agreed.
Give me back my time, Mr. President.
You will get back your time that I take in order to. It's not running. Thank you very much. All right. So, Senator Morris and members of the Senate, be guided, please. So, 82A6, the use of laptops and other forms of technology as audio-visual aids to support parliamentary presentations may only be undertaken at the discretion of the president or chairman in committee, and members who wish to make use of such aids must seek the prior approval of the president or chairman in committee. No, I will not be sitting up here at this time without knowing what is contained in that recording that the senator wishes to use in his presentation without having prior heard it and to give my consent to it. So it will not be facilitated at this time. Thank you very much. Move on.
Mr. President, and Mr. President, I accept your authority in the chair, but I want to also bring to the Honorable Chamber and to the public that I am making my presentation here from a laptop. And in making my presentation from the laptop, I never sought permission from you to use it. So are you going to stop me from continuing my presentation with the use of the laptop? Mr. President,
the recording will not be moved. Move on from Senator Floyd Morris.
Mr. President,
Senator Floyd Morris,
it's just a biased decision that has been taken.
Senator Floyd Morris, you of all persons are aware that you have certain privileges.
No, but I am following the dictate of the standing orders that you have enforced. And you are saying that I must seek permission from the President of the Senate.
Senator Morris, continue with your presentation without the use of the recording, which you have no prior approval to use. Thank you very much.
What, Mr. President? What, Mr. President? Mr. President? Mr. President, if you are going to do that, I am going to take this matter for legal review. If you are going to do that, I am going to take this matter for legal review. Because under the Disabilities Act,
Senator Morris, Senator Morris, I cannot stop you from doing anything that you wish to do in taking matter for review, or as the case may be. That is your prerogative. No, you do that.
No,
Senator Floyd Morris, continue with your presentation. Madam, continue the time for me, please.
What you're
continue
saying,
the time.
I want to be clear as to what you're doing.
But I have just said it. I said that you can do that. You don't have to tell me that. Go and do that.
No, I am asking
I am suggesting to you and saying to you, continue with your presentation minus the use of the recording that you were attempting or wanting to play.
The use of the recording.
Right? Good.
Not my laptop.
Continue the time for me, please, because you are wasting your time.
Mr. President, we are reducing the Senate to a circus. Mr. President, I was saying earlier that the statement made by the minister was incorrect about the NIS and the funding for the NHT. It is blatantly incorrect, and I've heard it before. And it is a deliberate attempt to try and distort history, because NHT is undoubtedly one of the most consequential social institutions in Jamaica. NHT has built over its 50 years of existence approximately 300,000 houses. 300,000 houses. Changing the face of the housing landscape in Jamaica from a situation where prior to 1972, wattle and daub, thatch houses, bamboo houses were the dominant face of housing in Jamaica. And what Michael Manley did in 1976 was say enough is enough. Our people deserve better. And so NHT was established to change that. And oh, what a marvelous job this institution has done. And this is why, much to my chagrin, at the 50th anniversary service, Senator Scott Motley, which was celebrated at a wonderful church in the city, Webster Memorial. I want to send special commendation to Reverend Carlyle. But at the church service, none of the officials of state, the Prime Minister spoke, the chairman of the NHT spoke, and no one made mention of the origins and the originator of the NHT. And I was very disappointed. I was very disappointed. And I'm saying, Mr. President, you know, the NHT has transcended political organizations, political administrations. It is, I mean, I give credit to Edward Seaga, former Prime Minister, for establishing HEART in the 1980s. We expanded on it. We expanded on it. But at least let us establish some decency in the politics and recognize those who have made their contribution. And we on this side is not going to allow the legacy of Michael Manley to flicker or die. The NHT is a part of the BNP saving pack for Jamaica. Mr. President, I want to quickly mention some things that are associated with what the government is trying to do with the NHT fund, because the minister made mention that in light of Hurricane Melissa, that the funds are needed to deal with and aid the recovery. And Mr. President, housing is critical to the recovery effort. Based on data, over 154,000 houses were affected. And the government did an assessment which showed 113,000 houses assessed. From the government's data, 18% of their houses totally destroyed. When you do the raw mathematical computation, you see it's about 20,000 houses. And then you have 40% that had partial damage in terms of just minor damage, and then you have another 42% with significant damage. Now, Mr. President, the government has allocated $10 billion to the roof program. And I heard the Minister of Labor and Social Security saying that between $8 to $9 billion have been spent and some 40,000 individuals have benefited. It means that $1 billion is left. But yet I don't hear where the rest of funds going to come from and what the government is going to do to cater to the other 70,000 people who have not received any benefit as yet. And also, how is it those 20,000 individuals who have seen their houses totally destroyed and they have been living under tarpaulin in St. Elizabeth, in Westmoreland, in Hanover, and in St. James? And I say, how can we talk about we care about our people? And we have so many of our Jamaican brothers living in houses where all you see when you go in St. Elizabeth and Westmoreland and Hanover is tarpaulin covering the houses. And I say that we from this side, what we are proposing is that we amend this legislation to allow for 2 years. And in those 2 years, the monies that are earmarked go specifically towards providing houses to the people in Westmoreland, in St. Elizabeth, in Hanover, and St. James who need this service, who need this support. They are our Jamaican brothers, and we make contributions to the NHT, and we are prepared to support that so that our Jamaican brothers can have a restart. And we propose to do it for 2 years. For 2 years. For 2 years. Mr. President, I'm winding down, and I want to say, Mr. President, that last year the government signaled that it was going to purchase 5,000 houses, 5,000, okay, 5,000 modular homes. And these were to come in by January 2026. January 2026. And to date, we have heard that 900 has arrived, and we have 300 that came, it has been made available today, I heard. But even then, not one of these houses, not one, have been distributed to anybody in St. Elizabeth, Westmoreland, Hanover, or St. James. Not one. 7 months after Hurricane Melissa, not one of those houses have been distributed to any of our Jamaican brothers and sisters. And we talk about, we care. Talk about we care. Talk about we care. Mr. President, I wonder what is really happening. What is really happening 7 months after this commitment, and that it should have started in January of this year. And then people want to come and challenge me when I say and ask the question, where they host them there. They're still asking the question, because until the houses are in the hands of the people, I am going to ask where they host them there. Let me correct that, because I will be ruled out of order by the president. You know, where are the houses? Where are the houses? I'm complying with the standing orders. Mr. President, you know, my heart, our heart is for the Jamaican people. And we want to make sure that the NHT, which was created to provide affordable houses for the people, to make sure that that remit, that vision, that mission, that commitment by Michael Manley, that is restored, and that is fulfilled by an institution that has done extremely well over the past 50 years, but is being brought off track by an uncaring government. May it please you, Mr. President.
All right, thank you very much, Senator Floyd Morris. Turn on the mic for me, please. Thank you. I recognize Senator Duncan. So Senator Duncan, I recognize you. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning. Morning to the parliamentary staff. Morning to the students and teachers who are here with us today. Welcome. And we're going to be nice and civil today, okay? So we can be a good example for the future generations. Mr. President, this morning I give my full and unconditional support for the amendments to the NHT bill to facilitate further drawdowns of $11.4 billion annually to provide budgetary support until March 31st, 2031. Mr. President, no administration on either side of the aisle wants to have to access funding support from the NHT. The issue of successive drawdowns is quite a politically charged matter that both the PNP and JLP administrations have had to deal with continuously from 2013. However, at the end of the day, this is a pragmatic and responsible financial decision that we must take as a country, as we must maintain our commitment to fiscal responsibility that we all have worked at across administrations over the past 15 years. In 2013, the first drawdown from the NHT occurred. It was suboptimal, as we all know, but necessary as a part of our fiscal consolidation effort to get our public finances in order, to achieve macroeconomic stability, and to regain credibility in the domestic and international markets. While that 2013 legislative amendment to the NHT Act marked the beginning of ongoing annual withdrawals, there is historical precedent for the NHT being tapped for funds outside of direct housing. Former Prime Minister P.J. Patterson in 2005 allocated $5 billion of the $38 billion that was held in reserves at the NHT at the time to fund a major education initiative, as my colleague has spoke to upgrade educational facilities across the island. Minister of Information at the time and Senator at the time, Burchell Whiteman, described the allocation at the time, and I quote, "It is in fact saying we are not just about building houses, we are providing for people's welfare." He also noted that the performance in the trust over the years has been above par, probably alluded to the fact that there were significant reserves built up of over $38 billion. State Minister for Education at the time, Senator Noel Monteith, also said he saw no difficulty, and he was Minister of State of it in Education at the time, with the Senate approving the bill to divert the funds to the education initiative. Mr. President, it is not uncommon for public body reserves to be used to support central government fiscal accounts where it acts as a ready source of cash to address shortfalls without the need to issue new debt or immediately raise taxes. In fact, Mr. President, some of us in this chamber will remember a pivotal reform undertaken during the IMF's precautionary standby agreement between 2016 and 2019, which shifted public financial management in order to make it more efficient. In 2017, the government de-earmarked eligible public bodies and started the process of consolidated budgeting for the public sector, that is both central government, ministries, departments, and agencies, and public bodies will be seen as a single entity. Mr. President, the idea behind consolidated budgeting is that some public bodies operate at a surplus while others operate at a deficit. and all allocations are made at different times to continue to ensure that the needs of Jamaicans are met wherever they arise, so allocative efficiency is enhanced. So we should bear this principle of consolidated budget in mind as we debate these drawdowns. Now, I'll give a little background as to where we are over the last 5-6 years, what has occurred in the global and local economic space. So, since COVID-19, the geopolitical risks have escalated and persisted, which has created significant uncertainty. After COVID, there was the Russia-Ukraine situation that ensued, that had the supply chain disruptions. We also had inflationary, we had interest rates increasing. So it has created significant uncertainty and continues, and this global uncertainty continues with recent events. Jamaica has also faced a situation where public sector compensation has substantially increased, with total wages and salaries moving from $225 billion in 21-22, financial year 21-22, to currently $522 billion for financial year 25-26. As a result, wages and salaries have moved from 30% of tax revenues to 53%, putting a significant squeeze on the fiscal space in light of all the events that are occurring around us, locally and globally. We have also had to deal with two massive hurricanes, Beryl and Melissa, and their effects, which has led to a slowdown of the Jamaican economy, with a 7.1% reduction recorded for the October to December quarter of 2025. The PIOJ has also estimated that the economy experienced a decline of 5.9% in the first quarter of 2026, with a projection for the economy to decline for the entire fiscal year by 1.7%. Mr. President, the GOJ has also recorded a fiscal deficit of $90.6 billion as at the end of March 2026, and is currently forecasted in the fiscal policy paper to record fiscal deficits for each of the next 4 fiscal years of $190 billion, $137 billion, $102 billion, and $86 billion, respectively, up to 2029-30. Jamaica is also contending with the current Middle East conflict, which has created a challenging and unpredictable global economic environment and creates great uncertainty as to the duration of the slowdown in the global and local economy. The knock-on effects could likely see a slowdown in economic activities and tax revenues. Jamaica faces a very risky global environment and without doubt will impact our local economy, and therefore it would not be prudent to discontinue budgetary support from the NHT during this cycle. Mr. President, I will now give an overview because we have to look at the capacity of the NHT to afford this budgetary support without hampering its core mandate. And we look at first the capital expenditure and housing expenditure. Despite these drawdowns, since 2015-2016, the NHT's total capital expenditure has more than doubled, moving from $24.9 billion to a projected figure of $54.7 billion for financial year 26-27. As a result,
It's just a projected figure. Learn what that means.
and $50 billion projected, yes. As a result, Mr. President, the NHT's total, but what is more important is the trajectory of that number moving on, almost doubling over this period of time in terms of capital expenditures and housing expenditures as a percentage increasing of contributions that are incoming, right? So the NHT is executed. Housing expenditure also more than doubled from $21.5 billion to a projected figure of 50.3. So CapEx and housing expenditure. Mortgages have also continued to increase over the period. Beginning like in 2013, there were actually mortgages increased from that period, from 2013 up to by 83,000 up to 250,000 mortgages in place at this point in time. with a further 5,400 mortgages for the current fiscal year. So mortgages continue to increase. So core mandate, capex, housing expenditure, mortgages are being increased. Now we look at contributions. The total amount of NHT contributions also continue to increase on an annual basis. So in 2030, total NHT contributions have more than tripled from $21.4 billion to $71 billion in 25-26. The NHT continues with these contributions and with the capital expenditure and with issuance of mortgages, continues to operate with surpluses. Since 2013, the NHT has made a surplus in each year at an average surplus of around $18 billion and projects a further surplus of $14 billion for the current fiscal year. With these ongoing annual surpluses, as a result, what we have now is accumulated surpluses which have increased to $185 billion at the end of financial year 25-26 and projected to increase to $190 billion in 26-27. But Mr. President, and we have to note this, the government does not take NHT funds from the annual surplus. However, even if that were the case, the NHT would still record an operating surplus every year if the $11.4 billion was taken from it. Instead, Mr. President, each year the NHT drawdown is taken from the NHT's accumulated surplus, which, as I said, currently stands at $185 billion, and which stood at $115 billion in 2013 when the first drawdown was done. So therefore, the accumulated surplus, the continuous generation of operating surpluses continue to increase, and the NHT is sitting on reserves of $115 billion in 2013 and $185 billion at the end of 25-26, right? So it is clear, Mr. President, from what I've outlined, that the NHT's financial position is sound and the surpluses generated by the NHT is significant, even with the 11.4 withdrawal per year. These withdrawals have not affected the capacity of the NHT to deliver housing solutions, and year on year it continues to increase its capital expenditure, housing expenditures, disbursement of mortgages to low-income earners and others. Therefore, Mr. President, the NHT is delivering on its mandate while staying financially strong and sound. It's also important to note, Senator Brown, it's also important to note that the $11.4 billion drawdown is taken entirely from the employer's non-refundable payroll contribution. The employee's portion is unaffected, and contributors continue to receive their refunds, which also continue to increase year over year. Mr. President, I believe it is important that we understand what is driving the shortfall in affordable housing as a country. And there are real structural issues which we must address as a country. The financing is not the issue. It is supply where we have an issue. So despite the strong position of the NHT, as I said, the demand for affordable housing continues to outstrip supply. I'm sure all Jamaicans and members on both sides of the aisle would want to see the supply increased. But there are issues that must be addressed, and we must address them as a country. Mr. President, we can state confidently that the availability of financing is not the issue, as I have demonstrated that the NHT has the capacity and the resources to finance. However, the real issue lies with the supply side constraints, that is the building capacity in the housing market. There is currently a mismatch between capacity, building capacity, and financing, which must be closed. The structural issues related to building capacity are not new to any of us in this house. The housing development sector, including National Housing Trust, is confronted by systemic bottlenecks that restrict housing delivery, including lengthy bureaucratic approvals, procurement delays, a severe shortage of construction labor, high material costs, limited availability of fully serviced land close to major employment and urban centers, and I will take some time to go through each of these. With respect to land scarcity and infrastructure, there's a lack of appropriately zoned and serviced land that includes roads, water, and electricity. Informal settlements also continue to grow due to the housing deficit, making formal infrastructure development significantly more expensive and complex. Bureaucratic delays also means that it takes time to get approvals through parish councils, NEPA, among other agencies building approvals, which creates a time lag, meaning projects often span several years from application to completion. Lengthy permitting and inspection bottlenecks also limit the pace at which developers can break ground and deliver units, hence NARA. Construction sector limitations. Mr. President, there's also a limited number of local large-scale, adequately equipped contractors capable of delivering massive master plan townships, and the construction industry also faces shortages of both skilled labor from time to time, and also from time to time essential building materials, hindering ongoing project timelines. So we have very few developers that can operate at any scale to close the gap between supply and demand. And that's an area that we need to pay attention to also. And as we have noted in those, excuse me one second. The NHD also assists buyers with low interest loans. If housing supply doesn't increase proportionately, support on the demand side simply causes property prices to rise. High global and local costs for foundational materials like cement and steel also make development progressively more expensive, resulting in higher final unit costs. But Mr. Speaker, the NHD is not sitting idly by. They're not, so, oh yes, sorry about that. Mr. President, sir, despite these challenges, the NHD continues to pivot its strategy and continues to look to how to address these structural constraints. So one area has been through the external financing mortgage program. This, the EFMP program, leverages the existing financial sector presence in the mortgage market, with the financial sector covering the full mortgage amounts which have been previously funded by the NHT. This is not outsourcing, but a deliberate effort to mobilize private capital while freeing up NHT funds to be deployed towards addressing the housing supply gap. After 3 years, the EFMP program has disbursed over $33 billion in NHT loans, with of course the NHT providing that interest rate subsidy, which brings down the cost of borrowing to the homeowner. Mr. President, the EFMP program, with the EFMP program, the NHT does not have to pull from its own reserves, does not have to deploy funds upfront, and will instead put to increasing the supply of low-income housing. Therefore, rather than primarily finance individual demand, the trust is now focused on the supply side now, because this is where the constraints are, the supply side, directly boosting housing supply through large-scale partnerships with developers for master plan townships such as Greater Bernard Lodge, Innswood, villages of Colbeck Castle in St. Catherine, Longwood Meadows in Clarendon, Friendship St. Elizabeth, among others, while partnering with private entities and the Heart Trust NTA to build contractor and labor capacity. The NHT will have to build on these efforts to tackle the supply side constraints in order to optimize and utilize the growing amount of contributions. Until such time, the NHT continues to run significant operating surpluses and continues to build reserves. So, Mr. President, the NHT continues to deliver on its core mandate, increasing housing expenditure, increasing mortgages, increasing partnerships with the private sector, financial sector, private developers, in order to increase supply to the market to meet the demand. Therefore, going along with that is the fact that the NHT is financially strong, sound, with significant resources, reserves, and its operations are not in the least bit hampered by these drawdowns, and these surpluses would likely have been invested in investment securities, repurchase agreements, or be sitting in cash. And as we note, the NHT sits on significant amount of liquid assets. Mr. President, at this time, there's just too much economic uncertainty, and there are real demands on the public purse post-Melissa with very little fiscal room. So the government must be prudent and continue with its arrangements for the next 5 years. These drawdowns will provide budgetary support to maintain fiscal stability. Without these funds, the government would face even worse budget deficits, to be forced to implement new taxes on the public purse or cut programs and impacting public services and disaster recovery. The NHT's robust asset position and strong revenue base allow it to sustain these transfers over the medium term without sacrificing its ability to fund housing programs and maintain cash surpluses. The NHT must, however, continue to work with, as it has been doing, the GOJ, the partnerships in the private sector, and the financial services to overcome, and the developers to overcome the supply and capacity constraints facing the housing sector, so that more affordable housing can come to the market for especially low-income earners. Mr. President, we must, however, endeavor to maintain our fiscal targets and rules, keep our economy stable in order to ensure we do not sacrifice long-term macroeconomic benefits for short-term politically charged issues. Mr. President, I unreservedly support the amended NHT Act provided for the continuation of these drawdowns, and it must be passed today, if it pleases you. Thank you very much, my colleagues.
Thank you, Senator Duncan. Senator Tame.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Jamaicans have a long history of struggles to own this land. For example, Paul Bogle, who we revere, and his people understood that owning the land gave you political power. Today, the beach access struggles are a part of that bid to make Jamaica belong to the people who have lived here but were prevented from claiming this place as theirs. Home ownership is, in that vein, Mr. President, part of the dream of many, many Jamaicans to secure themselves in Jamaica. Mr. President, both sides of this House recognize the value of housing to the Jamaican population. The dream to own a home has been greatly facilitated by the establishment of a National Housing Trust in 1976, specifically to address the affordability question in a population with limited means, even when they were considered middle class. Today, too many Jamaicans live in insecure conditions. They might be packed into cramped spaces where they must go outside to have some space. They might be deemed squatting and therefore subject to removals. They are living in places by the permission of others and therefore have precarious tenure. They might have unsafe dwellings, especially after Hurricane Melissa. They might, Mr. President, have inadequate access to transportation, must travel far distances to work and school, live in places where street lighting is poor, therefore giving opportunity for predatory behaviors. Too often, Mr. President, our people have too little access to the most vital source of living, that is water. It is time, Mr. President, that we agree on both sides of this House that our problems are too significant to continue the extraction of resources that could be fully dedicated to improving the conditions of living of our people. In the last 10 years, we have seen the construction sector booming, but the slums remain. We have seen luxury apartments go up into the sky in Kingston and St. Andrew. We have heard suburban communities complain about the growth. We all see them, Mr. President, but most people cannot afford them. We have experienced congestion related to roads destroyed in the process of building. And if ever these apartments are filled, we will all be competing for the use of limited water supply. Rural communities, too, have seen these developments taking up coastal space, building traffic along them. Who, we might ask, are these developments for? Are they, Mr. President, symptoms of an economic model dependent on excluding the majority of Jamaicans from access to and control over their resources? After promising to use NHT money to build housing rather than to pay the IMF, in March 2017, a year after being in office, Prime Minister Holness pointed to the need to use 11.4 billion from the NHT for payment on Jamaica's debt. He asked, quote, "What do we gain as a country if we do not use the NHT funds?" He told us, quote, "Let's say we even use the 11.4 billion that we would be taking, and we still had this major debt overhang when we come to make the determination of priorities. What is more important?" He said. This is the fundamental question. I agree, Mr. President. The fundamental question is, when we come to make determination of priorities, what is more important? Shelter for the people or paying down Jamaica's debt? Mr. President, the extraction of resources from the NHT have been critical to achieving the statistical goal of 60% of debt to GDP. Mr. President, the government claims the success of achieving a lower debt to GDP ratio faster than even they anticipated, even with COVID-19. And where are the people today, Mr. President? If they were asked, which priority would they choose? Imagine, Mr. President, if the money were used as the PM had promised to build housing. Where would we be? Debt reduction has come to dominate economic policy, but the people were never asked if they would prefer housing or meeting the goal of 60% of GDP. Even after the catastrophe of Hurricane Melissa, which left tens of thousands with their homes damaged, this strategy has not changed. Mr. President, you would have noted, as did the Independent Fiscal Commission, that even though we all agreed to suspend the national fiscal rules, the current public debt to GDP ratio is 65.6% and lower than the post-hurricane projection of 68.9%. All hail debt repayment while the people live under tarpaulins. Mr. President, the redirection of NHT resources is indicative of the fact that Jamaica's public investment is extremely low while its debt repayment is high. The IFC recently highlighted the fact that among the top performers for underspending capital expenditure were the National Housing Trust, the Housing Agency of Jamaica, the National Water Commission, and the Urban Development Corporation. Sums totaling 29.6 billion that could be spent on housing and infrastructure. We know, Mr. President, that when capital expenditure falls below budget, so too does debt. As the acting permanent secretary in the Ministry of Labor and Social Security recently told the PAAC, in the case of the government solidarity program, unspent money is returned to the consolidated fund at the end of the financial year for debt reduction. Debt payment, Mr. President, is currently the second largest expenditure item at 379 billion, or a quarter of the national budget. How, Mr. President, do these together impact our prospects for advancement? How can an economy grow, justice be promoted, and social peace be maintained when expenditure on physical and social infrastructure is neglected to meet debt repayment? Instead of using the NHT to finance affordable housing, as was ostensibly the intention, or investing in urban renewal, slum upgrading, to promote social justice, we are hooked on lowering debt. And why, Mr. President, does the government need to rely on raiding entities like the NHT, and we are now told also the Financial Services Commission, or forward selling the Sangster International Airport, when the macroeconomics were said to be great before Melissa?
That's what securitization is.
1 minute, Senator T. You have a point of order?
Yes, the point of order is the senator stated that the Sangster International Airport was sold. The receivables were discounted. So that was not correct. She's misleading the Senate.
Thank you. Continue, Senator Tim.
The revenues then.
Senator Bernard, whether it's a point of order or not, it's my call. You hear? Continue, Senator.
And it doesn't end there, Mr. President. Financial institutions have also benefited under the government's innovation of the external financing mortgage program, whereby the public funds of the highly solvent NHT have been taken and given to private banks and building societies at heavily discounted rates for onward lending to mortgagors. According to a Gleaner article of April 5th, quote, the National Housing Trust has funneled 1.1 billion to private banks to subsidize its external financing mortgage program, a move that effectively outsources its mortgage book and is projected to pay a further 1.3 billion in interest to financial institutions for the 2025 to 26 fiscal year. Is this, Mr. President, an upward redistribution of income from poor to rich? Meanwhile, in the world of the people, mortgages have become more expensive for borrowers, and overcrowding in households remains a problem. The just published 2020-30 Survey of Living Conditions tells us that in real terms, mean monthly mortgage payments jumped by 57% relative to 2021. It also tells us that the proportion of households living in overcrowded conditions was 51.3% in the poorest quintile, 41% in quintile 2, 32% in quintile 3, 21.8% in quintile 4, and only among the richest was it low at 7.1%. Internationally, conventions to which Jamaica is a party recognizes the right to decent housing. Our Charter of Rights recognizes the right to a healthy environment. Don't the people deserve decent, affordable housing with the appropriate infrastructure built in? Mr. President, what do you think the priority of Jamaicans would be if they had a say in the decision to withdraw 11.4 billion annually from the NHT? May it please you.
Thank you, Senator Tim. Senator Tavares Finson.
Do I need permission to speak from a seat other than my own?
You have permission to speak from a seat other than your own.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise to address this issue, which is of considerable national importance. The drawdown of funds from the National Housing Trust. The National Housing Trust occupies a unique place in Jamaica's social and economic landscape. It is more than a financial institution. It is a vehicle through which working Jamaicans contribute towards the realization of one of life's most fundamental aspirations, the dream of home ownership. Every month, thousands of Jamaican workers make mandatory contributions to the NHT with expectation that these funds will be managed prudently and utilized primarily to expand housing opportunities, improve housing affordability, and strengthen communities across our nation. It is therefore, Mr. President, understandable that any discussion regarding the drawdown of NHT resources attracts significant public attention and concern. Mr. President, I must take a moment to recognize and to place on the record a historical perspective that is often overlooked in our national discourse. There is a tendency in some quarters to suggest that organized government intervention in housing began with the establishment of the National Housing Trust. While no one can deny the significant role that the NHT has played in expanding home ownership and opportunities in Jamaica, it is important that we acknowledge that the foundations of a national housing policy were laid years before the NHT came into existence. The period between 1963 and 1972 under the Jamaica Labour Party administrations demonstrates clearly that housing was already a central pillar of government policy. The objectives were straightforward: to improve living conditions, expand access to land, facilitate home ownership, and provide planned housing solutions for working Jamaicans. During those years, Mr. President, the government pursued programs that focused on the development of housing schemes, the provision of service lots, and the expansion of infrastructure to support new communities. The state worked through public housing agencies and development corporations to address the growing demand for housing that accompanied urbanization and population growth. The Jamaica Labour Party recognized that housing was not merely a social issue, Mr. President. It was an economic and developmental issue. Home ownership was seen as a pathway to personal security, family stability, and wealth creation. Consequently, policies were designed to encourage the construction of homes and the development of new residential communities across the island. Mr. President, these include, but not limited to, Hope Pastures, Harborview, Mount Salem, Tivoli Gardens, Wilton Gardens, Hayne Avenue, Tavares Gardens, Duane Park, Elliston Flats, and every phase of Arnett Gardens were all built or initiated by the Jamaica Labour Party. You hear that now? Mr. President, it is important to remember that Jamaica had already established institutions dedicated to housing long before the NHT was conceived. Government involvement in housing development, mortgage assistance, land settlement, and urban planning was already an established feature of public policy. These initiatives reflected a deliberate commitment to improving the quality of life of ordinary Jamaicans. Mr. President, the historical record shows that the concept of affordable housing, government-supported housing development, and expanded access to home ownership did not originate with the NHT. Rather, the NHT emerged as an additional financing mechanism within the housing policy framework that had been evolved for many years. The establishment of the NHT in 1976 represented an important innovation to housing finance, but it did not create Jamaica's housing policy from scratch. It built upon foundations that had already been established by previous governments, including the Jamaica Labour Party administrations of the 1960s and the early 1970s. Indeed, Mr. President, many Jamaicans who obtained housing opportunities during the early period did so through government programs that existed without the benefit of NHT financing. Communities were developed, housing units were constructed, and families became homeowners before the NHT was established. As legislators, Mr. President, we have a responsibility to present a balanced and accurate account of our nation's history. Housing development in Jamaica has been the product of contributions from successive governments, public institutions, private developers, and the Jamaican people themselves. Therefore, Mr. President, it is accurate to say that the Jamaica Labour Party governments between 1963 and 1972 pursued housing initiatives that reflected a clear philosophy of expanding opportunities for home ownership and improved living conditions for Jamaican families. Mr. President, history is best served when we acknowledge continually as well as innovation. The NHT was an important chapter in Jamaica's housing story, there's no doubt, but it was not the first chapter. The housing policies and programs implemented before its establishment demonstrates that successive governments had already recognized housing as a national priority. Let us therefore give credit where credit is due, Mr. President, and ensure that the historical record reflects the full story of Jamaica's housing development. Mr. President, we must approach this issue with honesty and realism. Governments do not operate in ideal circumstances. They govern in the context of competing priorities, fiscal constraints, economic shock, infrastructure needs, public health demands, education requirements, and the PNP will know about that, national security obligations, and many responsibilities associated with managing a developing nation. There are occasions, Mr. President, when the government must make difficult financial decisions to maintain economic stability and support critical national programs. The reality before us today, Mr. President, is that the government has demonstrated that a drawdown from the National Housing Trust is necessary at this particular moment. Whether one agrees fully with that decision or not, we must acknowledge the broader fiscal context in which it has been made. Responsible governance requires balancing immediate national needs with long-term institutional objectives. As legislators, we must be prepared to recognize that extraordinary circumstances sometimes require extraordinary measures. However, Mr. President, acknowledging necessity does not mean abandoning principle. While the government may find it necessary to utilize the NHT resources at this time, it must simultaneously commit itself to ensuring that such drawdowns do not become a permanent feature of public finance management. The National Housing Trust was not established to serve as a recurring source of budgetary support. Its principal purpose is housing. Its mandate is housing. Its contributors expect it to focus on housing. When contributors make their payments each month, they do so with the understanding that their contributions will ultimately strengthen their prospects of owning, improving, or financing a home. Any diversion of those resources must therefore be viewed as exceptional rather than routine. Mr. President, the question before us, however, is not whether the NHT is important. We understand that. The question is whether in extraordinary circumstances, a reasonable government should be allowed to deploy a portion of national resources to protect the economic stability of the country and advance the welfare of all Jamaicans. I submit, Mr. President, that the answer is yes. Government is not an isolated collection of institutions operating independently of one another. The NHT exists within the wider framework of national development. Housing cannot flourish in an economy that is unstable, Mr. President. Housing cannot flourish where inflation is uncontrolled. Housing cannot flourish where government finances are weakened and where essential public services are threatened. Mr. President, the government has consistently maintained that the drawdown of NHT resources has been undertaken only in circumstances where the national interest required it and where the economic benefits to Jamaica as a whole outweighed the costs. Prime Minister Dr. Andrew Holness has pointed out that previous administrations also utilized NHT resources to support broader national objectives, including education, reform, and fiscal stabilization. Mr. President, we must also examine the alternatives. We must examine the alternatives. Those who oppose the drawdown rarely answer a simple question. If these resources are not utilized, and I want you to listen carefully, Senator Brown. If these resources are not utilized, where should the government find funds required to address national priorities? Should the government increase income taxes on working Jamaicans? Should it raise general consumption tax? Should it increase payroll deductions? Should it improve new burdens on businesses already facing global economic uncertainties? The Jamaican people elected this government on a mandate of fiscal responsibility, economic prudence, and a commitment not to burden citizens with new taxes unnecessarily. That commitment has been central to the government's economic philosophy. The choice, Mr. President, therefore, is not between drawing down NHT's funds and doing nothing. The real choice is between utilizing available national resources responsibly or imposing additional taxes on workers, homeowners, small businesses, and consumers. In that context, Mr. President, the drawdown represents a less burdensome alternative than broad-based tax increases that would directly affect every Jamaican household. Mr. President, it is also important to recognize that the government has not abandoned housing while drawing down these resources. The NHT continues to provide loans, grants, housing solutions, and financing support to contributors. Loan limits have been increased, benefits expanded, the program strengthened to assist contributors in accessing housing opportunities. The institution remains operational, financially viable, and capable of fulfilling its mandate. Furthermore, a strong economy ultimately benefits housing contributors themselves. When interest rates remain stable, housing becomes more affordable. When employment grows, more Jamaicans qualify for mortgages. When public finances are strong, government can invest in infrastructure, roads, water systems, and public services that support housing developments. When economic stability is preserved, contributors benefit not only as NHT members, but also as workers, entrepreneurs, taxpayers, and citizens. Mr. President, there is a tendency to view the NHT in isolation, but contributors do not live in isolation. They benefit from a stable economy, sound public finance, resilient infrastructure, quality education, effective health care, and national security. The government, therefore, has a responsibility to balance the interests of housing contributors with the broader interests of the nation. That balancing exercise is neither easy nor politically convenient, yet leadership often requires difficult decisions in pursuit of the greater good. The national interest must remain the guiding principle. The government's approach reflects a belief that Jamaica's long-term prosperity depends upon maintaining fiscal discipline while avoiding the imposition of new taxes on already burdened citizens. In that regard, Mr. President, the responsible use of existing national resources is entirely consistent with the government's mandate and with the commitment to prudent economic management. Mr. President, let me reiterate, housing remains important. The NHT remains important, but Jamaica itself must always come first. If the responsible and limited use of NHT resources can help preserve economic stability, avoid additional taxation, support national development, and strengthen the foundation upon which future housing growth depends, then such action is not only justified, it is in the national interest. Those are my submissions, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Tavares Vincent. Mr. Yeah. Thank you, Senator Tavares Vincent. Senator Small Ferguson. Senator Ferguson, you engage that mic there? It's engaged? Yes, it's on? It's on now?
Mr. President, rise to make my contribution to this very important debate, which seeks to extend the withdrawal of $1.4 billion per annum from the National Housing Trust for a further 5 years. Over the period, the bill will facilitate the transfer of approximately $57 billion from the NHT to the consolidated fund. And Mr. President, I think a lot has been said, but I want to say clearly that behind all of these numbers are people. The minister mentioned the teacher, the nurse, the police officer, the firefighter, the young professional, the public sector worker, the private sector employee who contributes every month while wondering whether home ownership will ever be within reach. For many Jamaicans, the NHT represents a sacrifice. It's a deduction from their salary. And Mr. President, underlining all of that is a representation of hope. The aspiration to own a home remains one of the most powerful aspirations in our society. There's an affinity to it. It speaks to stability. It speaks to dignity. It speaks to the desire to build something lasting for one's family and children. Across the world, home ownership remains one of the principal means through which ordinary families build wealth and achieve financial security. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, notes that owner-occupied homes represent the main store of household wealth in most countries. For Jamaicans, therefore, a home is not simply a place to live. It is the asset around which financial security and intergenerational wealth is built. It's a transformational asset. That's why this debate has attracted so much attention, as Senator Tavares Vincent said before me. And that's why it's generated such strong views, right, on both sides. And the concerns raised on both sides, strange when I can resonate with arguments made on both sides of this house, right? I don't think it's a matter of political convenience in the main. Right? I think they arise because of the deep connection between the NHT and home ownership and our people. Right? I mean, I think at the end of this debate, we're going to have to commission a paternity test because everybody is claiming paternity for this thing, right? Yeah, I believe it arises because contributors view the trust as their institution. It's built with their contributions. It's intended to advance a purpose that touches their lives in a very direct way. The debate, therefore, I think requires us to look beyond the numbers, as I mentioned before, and consider the purpose, why the NHT exists as the main core of the discussion, and the circumstances under which withdrawals from the trust were first permitted, and the standards that should guide us when resources collected for one objective are being redirected to another objective. And those considerations lead us to a broader issue which extends beyond the NHT itself. And Mr. President, that issue from my perspective is the integrity of purpose. When the state establishes a fund for a very specific purpose and requires citizens to contribute to it, or whether it justifies the collection of resources, whether it's taxation or otherwise on the basis of a very specific benefit, I believe it assumes a responsibility to preserve the purpose for which those resources are entrusted to it. And that responsibility, Mr. President, does not disappear because fiscal pressures emerge nor does it disappear because alternative uses can be found for the money. And it does not disappear because the fund has accumulated significant resources. Instead, I believe the internal purpose, or the purpose rather, the stated purpose, requires that the objective for which the resources were collected remains central to how those resources are ultimately used. As I've said in this chamber before, that principle is important because it goes to the heart of public trust. Mr. President, citizens are often willing to bear costs, make sacrifices, contribute resources, because they understand the purpose for which those resources are being collected and the benefit that will arise from the resources. And indeed, our citizens have made many sacrifices. The NHT was established with a defined purpose to assist Jamaican workers to access one of the most important assets that any family can possess. It's against that backdrop, Mr. President, that we must consider the history of withdrawals from the fund. And I've heard many different versions of history today. And it has been said before, and it should be acknowledged again, that the precedent for withdrawing funds from the NHT did not originate with the current administration. The previous administration did access the fund, but it was for a specific purpose in each instance. And you know, the circumstances surrounding the most recent decision to access the fund driven by the previous administration were extraordinary, as Senator Duncan said. Jamaica was emerging, or well, in the midst of one of the most severe fiscal crises in modern history. What he didn't say, however, is that at that time, the country was seeking to restore credibility following the collapse of the previous IMF arrangement under the JLP administration prior. The People's National Party government of the day was engaged in a comprehensive program of fiscal reform aimed to stabilize the economy and restore confidence. The same program we enjoy the benefits of today. Difficult decisions were required, and within that context, withdrawals from the NHT were advanced as an exceptional and time-bound measure to help bridge a fiscal gap during a period of national adjustment. And the measure was limited to 4 years at that time. It was not presented as a permanent feature of the fiscal framework or as a standing claim on the resources of the NHT. It was presented as an emergency response to exceptional circumstances. And as we know, the proposal was met with strong opposition at the time. I do have a video. For my purposes, it's sufficient just to note the concerns. And it has been said over and over who said what way. But, you know, the concerns that were held even then, some of the principles still resonate today. But the difference, Mr. President, is that the 4-year period contemplated at that time expired long ago. Administrations changed, economic circumstances changed, yet the withdrawals continued. And today, after 10 years in office, the government is seeking authority to continue the withdrawals for a further 5 years. So that's going to be 15 years in total, right? What began as an exceptional measure has now become embedded within the framework. In my contribution to the appropriations bill debate in March, I argued that the fiscal pressures facing Jamaica did not begin with Hurricane Melissa. It pointed to a reliance on temporary measures, redirected revenue, non-recurring sources of support to maintain the fiscal balance. And I mean, the arguments I'm hearing on the other side seem to confirm that. The continued withdrawals from the NHT was just a part of that pattern, and it remains true today. the legislation before us doesn't even present in form as a response to Hurricane Melissa. It does not identify the extraordinary event that is referenced adjacent to it for the temporary drawdown on the NHT. Indeed, the Memorandum of Objects states the government's economic program relies on these transfers to fund some expenditures in the national budget, without which expenditures would rather require reduction or a tax package table to cover the shortfall. And the rational advance is clear. It's budgetary support. It's now been entrenched. Right? That's materially different from the position that it is driven by the events caused by Hurricane Melissa. The issue before us, frankly, is that a measure that was introduced as temporary and extraordinary has now become a permanent component of the government's financing model. And that's an evolution that raises concerns regarding the integrity of purpose. Because the further the measure moves from the circumstances that give rise to it in the first place, the more difficult it becomes to reconcile its continuation with the reasons that the NHT exists. Mr. President, in my contribution to the appropriations debate, I also raised concerns regarding a very similar issue, the continued collection of revenues associated with the special consumption tax on fuel, which was initially designated to fund a hedging program, which the government has since discontinued. In response to those comments, my colleague, Senator the Honorable Keith Duncan, referenced observations previously made by former Minister of Finance, Dr. Nigel Clark. He said that hedging is expensive, unpredictable, and can lead to losses if poorly timed. Subsequently, during another debate in this honorable chamber, Senator Marlon Morgan sought to equate hedging with gambling. Yes, very creatively so, I must say. Mr. President, these comments, I think, provide an opportunity to clarify an issue that may not be familiar to many Jamaicans. Yeah, Mr. President, there's a distinction between hedging and speculation or gambling, as has been coined. And it's not a matter of political opinion. It's one of the foundational concepts that is well understood throughout modern risk management and finance. Permit me, therefore, to explain as simply as possible the difference between the two. A party who enters a hedge, Mr. President, is somebody who already has a risk and uses a financial instrument to reduce that risk. It's very much like insurance, which resonates with everyone. While somebody who chooses to speculate or gamble is somebody who deliberately assumes a risk in the pursuit of profit. Very much like the gambling that Senator Morgan would have spoken about, right? Before entering the transaction, somebody who is looking to do a hedge already has an exposure, while after the transaction, the hedger has less exposure. Before entering into the transaction, a person who is looking to gamble has no exposure. And after the transaction, the gambler gets more exposure. So the two activities are fundamentally different, even though they are being conflated together conveniently. The CFA Institute is a global professional body for investment professionals and the organizer and administrator of the Chartered Financial Analyst designation, which is one of the most widely recognized specialist designations in investment and finance. And the Institute did a study reviewing thousands of companies across dozens of countries around the world in 2020. And they concluded that firms with exposure that had hedging programs, like the one we're discussing, often experience lower overall financial risk and lower volatility in their operations. The review further concluded that hedging can reduce financial distress and lower the risk of bankruptcy. So, these concepts are widely understood in the world of finance. Senator Duncan, the Honorable Minister of Finance, and myself are members of the Institute, so we understand it. But it may not be easy for the Jamaican people to understand. Right? So I wanted to make the distinction clear. Now, the findings by the Institute, Mr. President, are entirely consistent with how hedging is taught and understood within the profession. Mr. President, I contend that Jamaica was not a speculator when it entered into the hedging program in 2015. Jamaica already had a risk. We import virtually all our petroleum requirements. Our electricity prices are affected by oil prices. Transport costs, as we have seen, are affected by oil prices. Food prices are affected by oil prices. The cost of living overall is. So long before the hedging program existed, Jamaica was already exposed. The purpose of the program was not to create any risk, it was to reduce it. That's why I respectfully disagree with any suggestion that hedging is equivalent to gambling. Insurance is not gambling. Risk management is not gambling. So the same principle applies here. Mr. President, the fundamental issue going back to the integrity of purpose is that in this instance, as with the discussion that we're having here, the purpose has gradually fallen away with respect to this tax. And today, as oil prices rise again, Jamaicans face higher fuel costs, higher electricity costs, and household budgets are constrained. And the decision to abandon the program, which is what sounds like a gamble to me, is affecting the ordinary people of Jamaica. Mr. President, that's why the integrity of purpose matters, because when resources are collected for a defined purpose, and when the purpose is abandoned, ultimately it's the Jamaican people who bear the cost. Mr. President, the principle carries as well and becomes more important when we move beyond taxes and contributions and consider voluntary donations made by citizens. Mr. President, following Hurricane Beryl and later Hurricane Melissa, Jamaicans at home and abroad and the international community responded generously. Businesses, individuals, members of the diaspora, international partners, they contributed. A dedicated platform was set up in the wake of Hurricane Melissa. Public appeals were made, and citizens were encouraged to support a national recovery effort through what was presented as an urgent and credible mechanism to assist those affected by the disaster. Now, Mr. President, I'm certainly not suggesting that disaster relief funds should be spent recklessly, nor am I suggesting that proper controls and accountability or planning should be abandoned. But, Mr. President, where funds are collected on the basis of urgency, there's a corresponding expectation that those funds will be deployed urgently. The Auditor General's report, Mr. President, raises questions in that regard. The report, Mr. President, said that approximately 1.44 billion had been received in donations, and 1.8% of the funds were expended. And the report notes as well that there were unspent balances associated with Hurricane Beryl amounting to $140 million. Mr. President, the government will point, as they are doing so, to the sums that have been spent so far in response to Hurricane Melissa. And I understand that that expenditure has been reported at approximately $67 billion. Right? And I'm not disputing whether any resources have been deployed. I also accept that some of the donated funds that I mentioned thus far will actually be spent, right, are committed. But, eventual expenditure doesn't deal with the concern. The issue is urgency. These funds were collected in the name of urgent relief. Imagine being one of the thousands of Jamaicans who saw the images of devastation, heard the appeals for assistance, and visited the Support Jamaica platform and made a contribution, believing that your donation would help a family in distress immediately. Imagine being a member of the diaspora who responded because you wanted to assist your country in a moment of need. It's difficult to believe, Mr. President, that those contributors would not be concerned to learn that months later, and in the case of Hurricane Beryl, years later, the overwhelming majority of the funds have not been spent. Mr. President, this goes to the heart of the discussion. Public trust is not an inexhaustible resource. When citizens are asked to contribute towards a specific objective, they expect that those resources will remain closely connected to that specific objective. Right? And whether it's NHT contributions, taxes, voluntary contributions in this case, the integrity of purpose remains essential. And without it, confidence is weakened and trust is diminished. And without it, future appeals for sacrifice and contribution become harder to make. Mr. President, the government has argued that the NHT is sufficiently capitalized and that the primary constraint on housing delivery is not funding, but supply. And there is merit to recognizing that housing delivery is not a matter of writing bigger checks. Right? That argument has been well made, I think. But there are many components to it. Land has to be identified, infrastructure has to be installed, approvals have to be obtained. Yes? Those are real challenges. But if those are the challenges, then those are the things that we should be solving through the ordinary course of government. Right? A supply constraint is not a compelling argument for withdrawing resources from the housing fund and the housing system. It's an argument to strengthen the system. Every year, thousands of Jamaicans enter the workforce, they begin families, and they aspire to own a home. Yet for many, home ownership feels increasingly out of reach. The same teachers and nurses, etc., that were mentioned before, feel that way. Many contribute faithfully to the NHT while wondering whether they will ever get an opportunity to afford a home. So if land is the constraint, then the NHT could play a greater role in bringing additional lands into the housing stock. The government controls significant land resources across the island. Some lands may be suitable for large-scale housing developments. Others may be suitable in particular for affordable housing developments, starter home programs targeted to young Jamaicans who have an aspiration to get that kind of beginning in life. If infrastructure is the constraint, then resources can be directed towards enabling infrastructure. The minister said that some of these places are not piped or wired. Who is complaining? The people who have control. Roads, water systems, sewer networks, those are all within the control of the ordinary business of government. So the government is complaining about the government. These investments are fundamental. They may not receive the same kind of instant benefit and instant gratification, laying the foundation and the infrastructure as others do. But without them, these housing projects can't happen. Right? So there's a strong case, Mr. President, for expanding the National Housing Trust role to make not only housing accessible, but improve the conditions of those who have already accessed a home. When you look at NHT schemes, for example, the program to upkeep roads is not far-reaching enough, Mr. President. Across the country, you have NHT schemes where the infrastructure is run down, deteriorating the value, that store of value that families hope for in their homes. Right? And I mean, the program surrounding that is unstructured and not far-reaching enough. Mr. President, the consequences of that are felt directly by the residents. Right? And, you know, it comes out in the reducing quality of their lives and the values of their homes. We can review loan limits and expand them. Right? If there are surplus resources, these are the kind of things we need to apply in terms of our mindset to housing. We need to broaden our ambition, Mr. President. And if the NHT possesses resources beyond what it can use, then we could focus, Mr. President, on an expanded housing agenda vis-a-vis continued withdrawals. Mr. President, you know, I've listened carefully to the arguments advanced so far in the debate, and particularly those in support of the bill. And let me be clear in terms of my own perspective. I personally don't dismiss the fiscal pressures that are confronting the country. And, you know, I certainly disagree that those fiscal pressures are solely because of the hurricane. However, the hurricane has imposed significant costs on Jamaica. It has damaged infrastructure, it's disrupted lives. We know what it continues to do. Right? It's not has, it's doing. Those realities are undeniable, Mr. President. But what is less clear to me is why Parliament is being asked to approve a further 5-year withdrawal from the fund in almost automatic way, right? In a way where it's stylized as being embedded in the economic program without any off-ramp. There's no communicated off-ramp. You know, everybody is happy to acknowledge that this is an undesirable measure, a particularly undesirable measure. Then why is there no focused effort around its discontinuation? Mr. President, one of the lessons that you see play out in public policy is that exceptional measures have a tendency of becoming permanent out of convenience. You don't want to do the hard, coordinated work, so you go along with the easy road. And as we've seen, this particular measure has started to fall into that bucket. That's 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and so on. Right? It's become embedded in the ordinary machinery of the government. This is precisely why we need to look at these kind of measures with care, Mr. President. And you know, it was said before, and I'll choose this way to say it because it was said on the other side. The NHT was not created to be a recurring source of budgetary support. But I couldn't tell that from reading the bill. The memorandum of objects says that the government is relying on it, and without it, it needs to take other measures. What are those other measures? Where is the guidance towards, or at least an intentional focus on building those other measures? This thing was created to help Jamaicans achieve home ownership and help contributors build a future. And indeed, for many Jamaicans confronting rising housing costs and affordability challenges, this purpose may be more relevant today than it ever was. Mr. President, I believe beyond this debate, there's a better conversation for us to have, which is how we're going to build more homes, improve affordability, and help more contributors realize that dream. Those are the conversations, Mr. President, that honor the purpose of the NHT and its contributors. Mr. President, with those words, I thank you.
Thank you, Senator Small Ferguson. And I noticed that, Senator Ferguson, I noticed that you have been re-elected as the President, Chairman of the Jamaica Security Dealers Association. Congratulations. Members on that side, of course, would take note that it's your 4th term. Let all who have ears hear. Thank you very much, Senator Small Ferguson, and you went right down to the wire. I appreciate it. President General, Senator Cavan Gale.
Thank you, President.
Senator Gale, engage your other mic for me, please. Is that your usual seat, Senator Gale?
No, I'm asking you, appealing to you that I can speak from a...
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you.
This time.
You know, there was a sitting that I wasn't here, and I would have seen photos of Marlon in this space. He seems to be very comfortable here, but don't get used to it. You know, President, let me say that I rise to participate in this debate, and I'm supporting the objectives of the bill. Let me make that clear. Whether some persons believe that it's not desirous to go down this route, I believe strongly that there are certain circumstances that would compel us to pursue again this initiative. President, it's a very sensitive issue. And, you know, in my mind, workers who contribute to the fund are always going to be desirous of achieving a response from those contributions. I say it is a sensitive issue because, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs demands housing solutions. People want housing. Our contributors are desirous of housing. And every time we debate this drawdown, is the same kind of intensive response that we're going to get, because it's a very sensitive issue. And we have had a number of drawdowns. But despite the drawdowns, contributions never cease. Contribution refunds never stop. Providing housing solutions never stop. Housing loans never stop. Home purchasing loans never cease. Build on own land never stop. Service lot loans never cease. Home improvement loans never stop. House expansion loans never stop. Construction completion loans never stop. Housing microfinance for lower income contributors never stop. Joint financing arrangements with approved financial institutions never cease. Housing grants to contributors never stop. Mr. President, I want to commend the National Housing Trust for the work that it has done for this country. President, thousands of Jamaicans who are contributors here and even in the diaspora have benefited from the National Housing Trust. It's the key to owning your own home. And the trust has delivered and continues to deliver. And President, I speak as a former board member. I would have seen the challenges and I would have seen the success. But I want to state, notwithstanding the concerns raised, Under this administration, there has been significant expansion in housing delivery. In 2025, the NHT reported that it had surpassed its target of 43,000 to 50,000. I commend the NHT. The NHT has reportedly invested over 343 billion in housing over the last 9 years, the largest housing investment program in the history of this country. You know, you had your say, you know, and you had your say where you even had to seize. There has been increased access to affordable housing financing. There has been a higher loan limit for individuals and joint borrowers. Mr. President, there has been increased finance support for the lower price homeowners. Major housing development across Jamaica, Longville Meadows, Friendship, Mount Nelson, Chantilly. There has been increased construction activity. Mr. President, further to that, you have had enhanced benefits for contributions, smart energy grants, construction scholarships. There has been investment in even the improvement in the service delivery to the contributors by the NHT. All of this has taken place with the drawdown. Mr. President, we are progressing as a trust. Mr. President, the National Housing Trust projects housing expenditure of approximately 50 billion and an additional 21 billion in mortgage subsidies for 2026-2027. So notwithstanding the intent of this drawdown, the National Housing Trust as an institution with its board and its management and this government is approaching the pursuance of its targeted approach with a level of flexibility and high confidence. Mr. President, you know, notwithstanding the fact that over the last years, it had expanded its role as Jamaica's principal provider for affordable housing. It has undertaken some very ambitious programs in the country's history. And these achievements represents a significant improvement compared to previous decades. And I think the NHT deserves commendation for its effort to modernize operations, increase project starts, expand contributor benefits, and improve access to housing opportunities for the ordinary Jamaicans. But, you know, whilst housing delivery remains a pursuance, the trust is constrained by some structural challenges. You know, it has an outdated contractor classification and procurement limits. You have a situation, President, where construction costs have increased substantially. Building materials have become significantly more expensive. Inflation has eroded the real value of existing contract thresholds. And President, currency movements and supply chain disruptions have further increased project cost. You have a situation where you have in place some practical problems. You have classifications in grade in terms of the level of contractors. But you have in that some unlimited contractor capacity. You know, when you have a housing solution and you start defining that you want to take up something in St. James, for argument's sake, Westmoreland, St. Elizabeth, because you want to provide the widest network of availability development in locations. But do you have the capacity of contractors to pursue this kind of objective? The NHT would have raised concern that there is need to revise the contractor value limits. So you had situations where you would have the grade 4 limits at 12 million. Now, when you have a grade 4 contractor at 12 million, with the excessive cost that that contractor would have to deal with, there's the need to review that, because how much a grade 4 contractor with a 12 million can provide adequate solution. And so there is the ask that you revise that grade 4 limit from 12 million to at least 50 million. Widen the spectrum. Then you have the grade 3 limits that is at 24 million, and the ask is to move that up to 100 million. And the grade 2 limits from 75 million to 300 million. What it is doing, President, is giving a wider capacity, wider resource in terms of the allocation and those that can bid. But the second issue, and I find this from a trade union's perspective to be a real concerning issue, and that has to deal with the construction labor force shortage. The leader of government business would have referenced it in her opening presentation. Senator Keith Duncan would have also referenced it. You know, construction employees are nomadic in nature. So they move from one development to another. And you create a development, and they would move to that development, but then you have others. And so the shortage is driven by several factors. The migration of skilled workers overseas, because if these workers have an opportunity and they are skilled workers, they're going to move to a space where we cannot really compete. You also have the situation where insufficient graduation rates from the vocational institutions. And I want to delve into that a little bit because I have a particular concern. There are some developers who are employers who want what I consider ready-made. They don't want to take those graduates coming from institutions. They want the experience, but the experience comes with a particular price. And there are often times when the experience, because of that level of experience, they are valuable elsewhere. We also have to deal with a significant concern that we have an aging construction workforce. So not everybody wants to come into construction. Not everybody wants to ply their roads into construction. And you have this increased competition for labor from reconstruction to infrastructure projects with the same players. And so everywhere financing is available, Mr. President, and contractors are secured, projects cannot proceed efficiently without sufficient skilled workers. And so you have this shortage in relation to the number of carpenters, masons, steel workers, electricians, plumbers, the finishers. And so it would have caused a delay on the impact of certain projects, a delay in project completion, difficulty in staffing multiple projects at the same time. It would have caused a reduced productivity, and you might even have quality assurance challenges. We would have seen it in some of the projects. And so what I want us to focus on, outside of coming here today to talk about a drawdown, we need to focus on how can we readily make changes and strengthening the skills pipeline? And, to address this challenge, and Minister Morris Dixon is here, consideration should be given to some sort of a formal partnership between the NHT and the Heart Trust in creating a more dedicated construction trades program aligned to the trust housing demands. So, President, there are some real challenges where bridging the gap of this skill is concerned. You have the outdated procurement thresholds. You have the limited contractor participation. We have the insufficient construction capacity. And we have this acute shortage of skills labor. We cannot not attend to these concerns. And President, I want to also suggest, if Jamaica is to meet its long-term housing targets and broaden infrastructure ambitions, and this is outside of housing now because we're a developing state and we have to continue to pursue our own development, but we need the skills in pursuing that. And the reality is that we must continue investing heavily on training and certification and workforce development. But, President, what I'm going to advance might appear controversial in nature, but we need to talk about it. Many countries facing similar demographic and labor market challenges have adopted carefully managed programs for temporary importation of skills labor in sectors experiencing acute shortages. Jamaica may eventually need to consider similar measures, particularly in areas such as the masonry, the carpentry, the electrical installation. And I want to say, such a policy, however, must never come at the expense of the Jamaican workers. So any such framework should be built upon several fundamental safeguards. The importation of labor should only occur where there's a clear evidence of a genuine shortage of local workers. So I believe that in the interest of pursuing this, we need to arrive by the utilization of the empirical data to make this determination. So it has to be evidence-based. An employer should first demonstrate that reasonable efforts have been made to recruit qualified Jamaicans. That is part of the evidence. And so foreign workers should be employed under the same labor standards, occupational safety requirements, and wage protections that apply to Jamaican workers. Any imported labor should complement rather than replace the domestic workforce. And President, employers who attempt to utilize foreign labor should be required to participate in knowledge transfer and apprenticeship programs that develop the Jamaican workers. When the free flow of foreign nationals legislation was enacted, it instructed the transfer of knowledge. And we have not divorced ourselves from that. And so any change in pursuance of this, one of the things I'd want to see, because we have to accept the fact that there is a real shortage. And once we get the empirical data, I believe a concerted effort must be made to have a kind of collaborative approach in social dialogue, where the government, the trade unions, the employers, but we cannot leave out the training institutions, because it makes no sense that you train for a target that you don't understand. nor appreciate. And importantly, any temporary labor importation strategy should be linked to a broad and national workforce development plan. So the objective should not be based on permanent dependency on imported labor, but rather the creation of sufficient capacity, Mr. President, to meet national housing needs, infrastructural demands, while simultaneously building a large, more skilled labor force. So I just wanted to make my advancement in this particular area very clear. And so, President, as we seek to address the housing deficit and accelerate national development, we must be prepared to examine all practical options. The ultimate goal, sir, must remain clear, ensuring that Jamaicans possess skilled labor capacity necessary to build their homes, communities, infrastructure. And we're doing this not for today, but we are planning for the future. And I hear the argument that, this intake or this drawdown shouldn't be for the defined period, but should be for a defined period. Not so expansive in nature. But I want you to appreciate something about this government. It is a government with well intentions, and we plan for the future. Because of who I am, I don't look at the road to hell.
Senator Gale, would you move on?
I'm moving on, But sometimes the crass loudness must allow.
No, I didn't hear the crass part of it. I just
hear the crass part.
I just heard the interruption.
It was coming. I'm just preempting.
Anytime anybody quote
Mr.
my
President,
friend KD, I get very jittery.
Therefore, while this debate focuses on transfer to support fiscal consolidation, we must equally focus on reforms necessary to strengthen the NHT's ability to fulfill its core mandate. The core mandate is we must always try to focus on providing affordable housing for the Jamaican workers and their family. And so the ultimate measure of success will not simply be the amount transferred to the consolidated fund, sir, but whether the National Housing Trust remains equipped to meeting the housing aspirations of present and future generations of the Jamaican workers. May it please you, Mr. President.
Sorry. No, you can stay there. I just need a consensus. Can you give me an idea as to how long you're going to be, Senator Tomlinson? What you call, sir? Okay, no problem. So we'll take you and then we take a half an hour. I'm not putting you under any constraint whatsoever, Thank you, President General. Senator Tomlinson. Pardon? Yeah, you could do that. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you, Senator Gale. Senator Tomlinson. I must tell you, I was at an event last night with Senator Tomlinson. Listen to me now. And I was walking around. The thing that said reserve on the chair was stuck onto my back. And I was walking around with it all night. And I heard the snickering behind me and I couldn't figure out. And Tomlinson wouldn't even say to me, President, you have on the reserve on the back of your shirt, Senator Tomlinson, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I've sat and I've listened keenly to the contributions from my colleagues on that side. And I've realized a pattern on the part of this administration. And Mr. President, this is a very whiny government. It complains a lot, and it sends the impression as if it is in opposition. Because what it does is that it identifies the problem and it complains about the problem as if it doesn't have state power and the authority to resolve the challenges. It is a very whiny government, and the people of Jamaica did not elect you to complain. They elected you to resolve the issues so that their lives can be better. Much has been said about the capacity of the NHT, its financial capacity. In fact, much has been said about its liquidity and its ability to undertake the necessary projects needed to deliver housing solutions to the people, notwithstanding the annual extraction of the $11.4 billion. Mr. President, in fact, I heard a comment in the presentation on that side that the NHT sits on significant liquid assets. So I pulled the financial statements from the NHT from the last available annual report. And the last available annual report would have been 2024, 2023. And I examined the balance sheet, Mr. President, published. And I'm just going to pull, for example, 2024. And the audited financials show that the NHT had total assets of $378 billion. But of that total asset amount was only $9.6 billion in liquid assets. The actual cash, the actual assets that NHT could pull on in terms of those that are liquid cash and those that can be converted to cash quickly. That's really just $36 billion in 2024. If you look at 2023, it's really $18 billion in liquid assets. That was just 5.4% of the total asset base of the NHT. Let's say the higher of the two figures. Let's take the $36 billion. To construct a housing scheme with at minimum 100 housing solutions, and you have irrigation, you have to prepare the land for that, it will exceed $40 billion to properly construct a housing scheme, water, and provide all the amenities that are necessary for that housing scheme to be appropriate and ready to accommodate persons living there. So when I look at the liquidity that is available to the NHT, I'm not sure that it is so significant. And when you actually drill down and look at the financials, it says taxation recoverable in 2024 was almost $8 billion. And in 2023, it was $7.5 billion. What this means is that this is money owed to NHT by central government. Taxation recoverable. So what we're identifying here, Mr. President, is not only is the central government extracting $11.4 billion from the NHT for central budgetary support, it also owes the NHT $7.8 billion in 2024, and in 2023, $7.5 billion. And this looks like a figure that has just been sitting there on the balance sheet, Mr. President. We have to take into account the costs that the NHT has to face. The NHT has an outsourcing program, Mr. President, where it outsources the mortgages through the external financing mortgage program. Mr. President, what that means is that persons who earn $30,000, more than $30,000, $30,000 and above weekly don't have a choice. They have to pursue the NHT loan arrangement through private commercial partners. Mr. President, the NHT pays those private commercial partners a subsidy to provide that financing to borrowers at the NHT interest rate, which would be lower than market rate. So that's an additional cost to the NHT. In 2024, it was around $1.6 billion. But what I think is not highlighted enough is that when you pursue the NHT mortgage through the external financing partners, that borrower loses access to some subsidies that ordinarily would have been provided had they accessed the loan through the NHT. So the subsidy for the life insurance, they don't get that. The subsidy for the peril insurance, they don't get that. So what you're finding here is that the people's money taken from their salaries to support a fund, a trust, where they can access financing for housing solutions at lower costs, is being diverted to central government. And now the NHT has an external financing program whereby they can access financing through private commercial partners, and they do not get the subsidies that they could have accessed had they received the funding from where they put their money in the first place, which was in the NHT, Mr. President. Not only that, when they pursue the mortgage financing through private commercial partners, the loan processing fees are higher, significantly higher than what it would be or what it would have been had they accessed the loan directly through the National Housing Trust. Now, Mr. President, what would a reasonable government do? Understanding the private market and understanding the cost to the private commercial entity. What would a reasonable and caring government do? A reasonable and caring government would not extract the $11.4 billion for general budgetary support. They would have kept that $11.4 billion with the NHT and would have ensured that those subsidies that could have been accessed through the NHT can still be accessed through the private commercial partners. But when you take $11.4 billion from the NHT, you reduce their ability to even extend those subsidies to those individuals who are forced, because they don't have a choice. Once you earn above $30,000 per week, you must access the NHT component of your financing through the private commercial partners. And then you lose access to all those subsidies that you could have had, and you face a higher loan processing fee. Why can't the government retain that $11.4 billion with the NHT and use it to extend the subsidy to those persons who they force to go through the private commercial partners, Mr. President? So when you think about it, the extraction of the $11.4 billion is putting the borrowers in a very difficult position, Mr. President, because they have had to face higher fees and loss of the subsidies. There's also something else that they lose through the external financing mortgage program, home grants. Once you access the NHT component through the external financing mortgage program, you don't get the home grant that could have been provided to you. So let's say, for example, co-applicants. Let's say you have applicant A, and she makes less than $30,000 per week. So she is allowed under the guidelines to access the NHT financing through the trust. But let's say she joins with a co-applicant who is earning over $30,000 per week, and they make a co-application to the NHT. Mr. President, she does not get to access that home grant because, Mr. President, she is joining in her pursuit of the loan with someone who is earning above $30,000, Mr. President, per week. That's problematic. And you can understand the need for her to join with someone because ordinarily her income in itself would not be able to allow her to access that. So, Mr. President, when you look at this kind of arrangement, it is putting the borrower in a very difficult position and is stripping him or her of benefits, subsidies, and reduced fees that could have been accessed. Now, all we are saying on this side is that what could have been done is to extend those subsidies to those persons who access the external financing mortgage program. And the NHT would have been in a better position to even consider or to do that, Mr. President, if we were keeping the $11.4 billion at the NHT and not extracting it for general budgetary support, Mr. President. we also have to think of what costs the NHG has had to face, particularly in wake of the passage of Hurricane Melissa. Recall the government announced a moratorium, which would eliminate interest payments in the mortgage payment for those persons who have been impacted. And recall that the mortgage payment has 3 components. You have the principal, you have the peril insurance, and you also have the interest payment. So those 3 components constitute the mortgage payment that you make on a monthly basis. So the government announced that they would waive the interest payment. That is loss. That's a loss to the NHT. And we understand why it was done. I don't think anyone is reasonably arguing against that. It was a response in wake of the hurricane, and that's understandable. You know. But the problem is that that money has been lost and has to be recorded on the books of the NHT as an expense, Mr. President. And then you come and you seek to take $11.4 billion, not just 1 year, not just 2 years, but 5 years from the NHT. I think that that is very problematic. Furthermore, Mr. President, the NHT has to keep on its books roughly, Mr. President, $40 million thereabout in roughly $40 million Mr. President, in peril reserve on its books. That has to be there every single year. So when someone looks at the NHT finances, the financials, and say the NHT has this significant reserve, some of it cannot be touched because of the arrangement with the peril insurer. It has to be on the books. It has to be there, Mr. President. So we are saying that it is unreasonable to extend over a 5-year period the continued extraction of the $11.4 billion. And any attempt to create an equivalence between the crisis during 2013 and 2016 to what is happening now is a false equivalence, Mr. President. At the time, we understood the severity of the economic collapse that we faced on account of the poor management of the economy under their administration between 2007 2011. I understand that you're in the Ministry of Finance at the time and contributed to policy making there. No wonder why the economy was on the brink of collapse. Mr. President, we had to do it at the time, Mr. President. So the false equivalence that they want to make on their side with respect to the crisis that we faced then and what we're looking at now, Mr. President, must be highlighted. And that is an hypocrisy on their side. Mr. President, I said I won't be long, but I had to highlight just the cost, the increased cost, the strain that you place on a borrower because of the lack of liquidity, the significant liquidity that you pointed to is not there, and the financials don't support that. But you rob the NHT of the amount that could have been available to provide subsidies and reduce fees, Mr. President, and put, Mr. President, the borrower in a very difficult position. We don't support it on this side, and we will vote no, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Tomlinson. This Honorable Senate will now rise until 2:30.
No one wrote a speech for me now, like you.
So why you come to me with that foolishness, you know? You elect a prime minister and is a prime minister around the country. It is time we learn to hold our leaders accountable for their actions and stop making excuses for them. Stop making excuses. Otherwise, go elect the people who really run in the country. And I don't want the right start that stupid argument. Hold the people you elect accountable and stop making excuses for them.